Today's topic will be a bit different one, no doubt. And we shall be primarily talking about today on Simone de Beauvoir, since we are going to start Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. And before starting Simone de Beauvoir and her The Second Sex, and I think that we should go for particular discussions. And today's discussion will be primarily focusing on the intellectual background. Simone de Beauvoir, that brilliant career that she had, and the kind of journey of different genre that she took up as a writer, as a thinker. First of all, she is remembered today as an activist, someone who really did some great contribution for the upliftment of the women and her causes that she really made for while as an activist in different areas actually. If we read The Second Sex, then we'll necessarily see how brilliantly Simone de Beauvoir pointed out the great causes and the social categorization, why the woman is a woman, and that issue of gender role that the woman actually has to face in everyday relationships. These are some of the basic areas, no doubt, but along with this, we find in The Second Sex how brilliantly she points out the different issues of society, of culture, of anthropology, of biology, and different other philosophical considerations for which Simone de Beauvoir is basically considered and recognized today as a feminist thinker, as a proper. So this Simone de Beauvoir, actually the kind of upbringing she had, that intellectual platform that she possessed gradually, it is not a kind of a magic that she possessed all on a sudden. Rather, it was a kind of a long process. First of all, that it was the Second World War or the post-World War scenario. And it was in France that was actually taking up new thinkers. Philosophical background, of course, played a very vital role at this very time. So Simone de Beauvoir as a thinker, actually we find how she wrote a lot about of that particular time frame when she was taking up new ideas, thoughts, and she was actually, just like as it was generally said of T.S. Eliot, and it was no other than Ezra Pound who commented such kind of a brilliant, remark that he made for T.S. Eliot. That T.S. Eliot has, modernized himself of his own, almost like that. I would like to say here in the case of Simone de Beauvoir that Simone de Beauvoir actually was trying to her best, and she was actually taking off that philosophical background in different ways, and so many different ways. And this one, I think, will be, quite understandable. How in that time of 1940s or 1945, when Simone de Beauvoir actually was writing her autobiography. And in that autobiography, and so many other places, actually, we find the kind of intellectual setup that she was trying to develop at a time. Let me read out from that very something that she wrote over there. It was labeled not only a resistance novel, but also an existentialist novel. So this is the reference of that resistance novel that we would like to find here is no other but the second novel of Simone de Beauvoir. And the second novel of Simone de Beauvoir was The Blood of Others. Now, it was the second novel of Simone de Beauvoir regarding what she made the comment. It should be not only a resistance novel, but an existentialist novel. Henceforth, the label was to be affixed automatically to any work by Sartre or myself. Sartre had refused to allow Gabriel Marcel to apply the adjective to him. My philosophy is a philosophy of existence. I don't even know what existentialism is. And there is a kind of let me elaborate at this very particular stage that at the preliminary stage, there was a long debate regarding the term existentialism because Sartre had the kind of habit or statement that he wanted to be categorized, not to be categorized as an existentialist. Rather, philosophy of existence, that much he wanted to have. That much he wanted to categorize or attach to his writings. But the particular neologism, that new term, that existentialism, that probably Sartre was not very familiar with. And the very same thing we find in the case of Simone de Beauvoir as well. Now, the new term that was in fashion, the new term that was in practice, and primarily with the hand of Gabriel Marcel. So it was Sartre first who said, my philosophy is a philosophy of existence. I don't even know what existentialism is. Now, Simone de Beauvoir continues. I shared his irritation. I had written my novel before I had even encountered the term existentialist. My inspiration came from my own experience, not from a system, but our protests were in vain. Ultimately, what happened, Simone de Beauvoir comes to the conclusion at the end of this very brilliant, reminiscence. In the end, we took the epithet, and they had no choice. They were labeled as existentialists, and existentialism got in touch with their writings in such a brilliant way that they could hardly dissociate the term from the rest of the things. Okay? So, in the end, we took the epithet, that means adjective, that everyone used for us and used it for our own purposes. Now come to the point that existentialism that we often talk about, that existentialism, the kind of term gradually came into vogue in that very post-World War scenario, and particularly with the writings of Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and so many other writers. And we know that a huge number of philosophers and thinkers and writers were there at that very time. And everyone are actually, each and everyone is a big shot. Jean-Paul Sartre and Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, we have Karl Jasper, we have Martin Heidegger, we have Gabriel Marcel, and of course we have Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Simone de Beauvoir. Each and everyone actually categorized existentialists, and they are those big shots. Now, what is existentialism actually all about? Now, existentialism, if we'd like to make that very critical term in a simplified manner, it is particularly talks about freedom, it talks about responsibility, it talks about authenticity. Actually, existentialism questions the identity, the existence. Who am I? Why am I for? In what way I am connected to the rest of the people? The issue of God, human being, nature, all those very conflicting ideas that someone is having or in a kind of a position they are in, these are all about that existentialism actually talks. Existentialism necessarily talks about that very inner nature, the very basic essence of a human being. It talks about some of those, philosophical, deeper knowledge and the internal queries that someone comes into. And this very theory actually, it's a series of thinkers who actually promoted such kind of different branches of knowledge and thinking process that came into ultimately that very particular condition that we call today existentialism. And the philosopher, the thinker, who should be given that importance, through whom actually this kind of, he is one of the pioneers, no doubt, he is no other than Hegel. Okay? Hegel was a kind of a philosopher with whom Simone de Beauvoir was not actually introduced to quite early. Rather, her understanding of Hegel, it was quite late. And this thinker, Hegel in one hand, Karl Marx on the other, Friedrich Engels on the other, all together, they helped a lot to develop that intellectual capacity of Simone de Beauvoir. Whenever we talk of Hegel, that German philosopher Hegel, we should think of that very magnum opus by him. That magnum opus of Hegel, that is so popular even today, a huge text, easily available everywhere, Phenomenology of Spirit. Phenomenology of Spirit, that was published in 1807, and very popular. It's a very landmark contribution, and regarding which Karl Marx had the very famous opinion that it should be considered as the true birthplace and secret of Hegel's philosophy. Now, if you want to know Hegel, you must have to go through this very famous text that is called Phenomenology of Spirit. Along with this brilliant text, Hegel had so many other contributions as well, and he wrote Science of Logic, he wrote Encyclopedia, he wrote Philosophy of Right, and so many other texts. Now, Simone de Beauvoir is actually going through, and the book, the text that influenced her at the very optimum level, the text is the Phenomenology of Spirit. Okay? Now, here we find spirit. The word is very catchy. Now, it may come to your mind, what is this particular quote-unquote spirit? It is basically a self-consciousness, a self-conscious existence that we often possess, okay? That travels through various stages of our, alert mind, conscious mind. Now, this alert on the conscious mind moves in so many branches, moves in so many stages, and through which we can reach our ultimate goal. So what is our ultimate goal? Our ultimate goal is nothing that is quote-unquote absolute knowledge. We all seek for an absolute knowledge, okay? So this very journey for absolute knowledge is never an easy task. In Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, explains that it's a kind of a progress, and this progress cannot come all at once. The progress only happens when we commit some error. It doesn't mean that you have to commit error all the time. It actually means that, error may be there, because through error, you encounter a kind of an hindrance. When you do mistake, a kind of a self-inquiry comes through you. Error, mistakes lead you to that next stage that we call enlightenment. And through enlightenment, we go to some greater knowledge, self-wisdom, self-knowledge. So life is actually series of metaphors, series of stages. These are basically helping us in so many various ways. And our spirit, this particular consciousness that we all possess in our own typical way, this spirit is a free spirit. It seeks freedom, freedom of wisdom, freedom of speech, freedom of knowledge. We want to say that we think of. We never want to be suppressed. all the ideas, all the great thoughts that we have inside us, these are not to be suppressed, but it has a certain processes. These processes, in the words of Hegel, can be called dialectical phases, dialectical stages. So what this dialectic is, we can talk it later on, but these stages of wisdom, stages of knowledge, enlightenment goes through three very basic pillars. And one is the thesis. And through thesis, we move for the next one that is called antithesis. And ultimately, the process of synthesis comes. So thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This actually make these very brilliant stages that ultimately lead us to the self-wisdom and knowledge. Now, whenever we talk of Simone de Beauvoir, whenever we talk of, Jean-Paul Sartre, and of course we talk of, Hegel. So we need to speak of another very important thinker. We must go back to Hegel soon, but we have to remember that she is no other than Judith Butler. Okay, Judith Butler, a philosopher, thinker, psychoanalyst, a thinker, a writer of many laurels, actually. She is primarily a kind of a leading personality in gender studies, a very contemporary gender studies, a big shot, Judith Butler. Now, Judith Butler talks a lot about Hegel. Judith Butler talks a lot about Simone de Beauvoir as well. Now, Hegel was read by so many people, as it was also read by Judith Butler. Now, how is Judith Butler is also criticizing, putting her comments on Hegel's idea of this journey of the self-consciousness? Now, Judith Butler thinks that this journey of self-consciousness that we find in Hegel is almost like a cartoon-like figure, It just like a cartoon. We often watch cartoon on TV, or on TV, mobile, and so many other devices. Now, what do we see? This cartoon, it seems that it encounters so many obstacles. It encounters so many difficulties. And then every time, think of Tom and Jerry. The obstacles, the difficulties Tom and Jerry face all the time, they no doubt they come across difficulties in their life, but at the same time, they know how to pick themselves up. They pick themselves up, they, shed off all the dust, and then they start again. Now, Hegel's this kind of phenomenology of spirit talks about that movement, the journey that actually influenced Simone de Beauvoir in such a way that gradually she got obsessed in that particular way. Now, regarding spirit and regarding self-consciousness, regarding abandonment of quest and desire. So this is something that whenever we take some initiatives, whenever any initiative that you have taken so far in your life, you get that in some cases, you find some problem. It may be a financial problem. It may be a psychological problem. It may be of many other difficulties that you often face. But these difficulties are actually helping you out to make new ways. And through the new ways, you ultimately move for the self-knowledge. So Hegel gradually develops a kind of a historical journey of the dialectical change. And this dialectical change, that confrontation in our everyday experience to reach the ultimate destination, this is very common. And there is nothing wrong. And this is something very, very, an ingredient, a basic ingredient of all our, notion of all our journey. Now, we are talking about that dialectic, the term that comes in the understanding of Hegel all the time. So what dialectic is all about? Now, dialectic is a philosophical process. Dialectic is a kind of a philosophical inquiry, I must say. And Hegel popularized the term dialectic. But this is not something that Hegel is using the term for the first time, because before Hegel, there was the famous ancient Greek philosopher Plato, the teacher of Aristotle, who actually started using the term dialectic. Dialectic is actually a movement, okay? It talks about the thesis that I was talking about a few minutes back. Thesis. And this thesis, when someone proposes something, in most cases, society in general has the very common habit to negate. Whatever innovative thing that you come up with, people have the very common notion, okay, forget it. It is good for nothing. It is not actually of any use. Let me tell you a very nice story. In India, Indian Railway was initiated for the first time in 1853. Now, before coming Indian Railway in India, when it was still in a kind of an imagination, and it was actually people are planning, they were actually making some tests over there in Britain, in other places. Now, for the first time, in European country, when that railway was initiated and for a tiny distance took up, and they took it as a kind of a distance to be covered as a testing. Is it really working? So there was a huge engine, metal engine, iron engine, and curious witness gathered on the both sides. And when that pioneer, the engineer who for the first time started the engine, and people were all actually full of curiosity. How does it happen that a vehicle like this will run through two particular lines? Is it really possible? Is it feasible in any way? Let's see. The moment the engine started, you know what happened? Everyone ran away from the spot. Everyone simply ran away from the spot so that they shouldn't be killed, so that they shouldn't be actually trampled over. So this is not in the case of the first making of the railway, or the first making of the aeroplane, or first making of any idea. Whatever it is, it's a very common tendency that it gets negated in most cases. And that is actually antithesis. There is a direct clash. And subsequently, we find that after much efforts, it gets synthesized. So the thesis and the antithesis ultimately, after passing through a particular period of time, after passing through a moment of different several stages, it gets synthesized. And ultimately, the synthesis goes on. And later, after much lengthy time, when it passes, it gets accepted. The acceptance of a proposal is never an easy subject. This is actually the dialectic that Hegel was talking about. And this dialectic also came, helped Simone de Beauvoir to know that the kind of proposals that she has in mind regarding the upliftment of the women, regarding the women empowerment, regarding the new agenda that she would like to take up with, will never be accepted all on a sudden. There must be certain antithesis. Simone de Beauvoir gradually came to know all about this with the understanding, reading of Hegel. For an example, now all dogs chase cats. If this is an example of a thesis, the antithesis will be, my dog who lives in the same house as cats doesn't chase cats. Of course, this is a kind of a counter statement, of course. And now comes to the synthesis. Now, what is the synthesis all about? Then ultimately we come to the conclusion that, okay, it's true that not all dogs chase the cats, but some dogs chase cats. So you come to the conclusion. Look, you know, introducing a statement, introducing an idea, and then have some setbacks over there, and then ultimately, after much struggle and then pioneering some other parallel ideas, can reach you, can help you out to reach the destination ultimately. So this is all about dialectic. This is those very preliminary words that we need to read more and more while reading Simone de Beauvoir. So that's all for today. So I will stop here today and we'll go on in our next class, in our next discussion. So thank you